Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for August 23rd, 2012. This program provides network security news, highlights discussion on cyber threats, as well as countermeasures for those network threats and system owners. Joining us today, we have Dave Gross, Jim Clausing, and John Hogoboom. I'm Brian Rexroad, and let's go ahead straight over to Jim here. Jim, I guess there's a worm called Crisis out there. What can you tell us about this crisis?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, there was some new malware that was reported on in the last couple of weeks, first by Symantec, then by Kaspersky, and there was a write-up in the Register this past week about it. And the interesting thing about it is that it's multi-platform. They call the worm Crisis, and it was first written up as OS X Crisis, and then W32 Crisis. We've seen some multi-platform malware before, but it primarily was targeting applications. You know, Java malware we've seen before, and that's actually the delivery mechanism for this one. But what was kind of interesting about it is it's presented to the user as a jar file claiming to install some, I think it's an Adobe Flash something. And depending on whether you're running a Windows machine or a Mac, it will determine what operating system it's running under and then drop the appropriate payload for that particular architecture. Mock executable if it's on a Mac, and a PE executable if it's on a Windows box. What's kind of interesting about this one is that this one goes a little further, especially on the Windows platforms. If it detects any VMware machines, any virtual guests on the system, it will use the VMware's mount utility to mount the virtual machine disk, insert the malware on it, and then unmount it. So the next time that the user fires up the virtual machine, the malware will be preloaded on it. Also, if it finds any removable disks, it'll copy a copy of itself out there along with an auto-run file, so that when it gets, the USB key gets inserted on another system, if auto-runs aren't turned off, it'll automatically execute there. And it also has a piece that will, if you sync your Windows mobile device, if you plug that into your laptop to sync things up, it apparently has an executable that works on Windows Mobile, and it'll copy itself over to your mobile device. I'm not sure exactly what it does on the mobile device. On the Windows and Mac machines, it appears to be password stealer, banking, try to steal banking credentials and that kind of thing. But I wanted to bring this up because this one was kind of interesting in that it did attack multiple machines, and especially I've never seen this before, where it would install itself on virtual machines that it found on the box.
Right. Yeah, I think this is the first, at least that I'm aware of this type of thing that was targeting really the virtual machines themselves. In fact, in many cases, as you well know, the malware tends to look for the virtual machine and then die if it sees a virtual machine.
Exactly, and this one, it intentionally installs itself there.
Hey, Jim, is it looking for certain vendors' virtual machine disk files, like VMware versus VirtualBox versus some others?
Right. At this point, it looks like it only attacks VMware virtual machines. It doesn't look for the VirtualBox or Virtual PC or any of those. It looks like from the write-ups I've seen, I've not examined the malware myself, but from the write-ups I've seen, it looks like it's specifically targeting VMware.
Yeah. So do we have any idea how widespread this is at this point?
No, don't have a real good feel for that. I think I think Kaspersky had said they had not seen it too much in the wild yet, and some of my other sources are reporting having difficulty getting their hands on samples. So I'm not sure that it's all that widespread at the moment, but it is. It has been found by a couple of folks. So.
Well, it certainly has some scary prospects here, so something we'll be wanting to keep an eye on and see how it's developing and there's an underlying objective here. It's not just to infect the machines, I'm sure.
Right. And from what I saw about it, it looks like it installs rootkit on Windows machines, so it's sophisticated where it's trying to hide from being detected. It can shut off antivirus programs and stuff like that. And in terms of the Mac systems, it looks like it doesn't even require root access to install, although they did say that some of the features may be hampered if you don't install it as an administrator.
Yeah, it installs with the privileges of the user that's running, so if you've got a multi-user machine, it wouldn't necessarily steal the credentials from all the other users. But yeah, and again, one of the things that we talk about on this show a lot is the issues of when you're syncing your mobile devices with your laptops. We haven't seen much malware do it, but it's something that's been a concern of ours for a long time. Is starts hopping, copies itself over onto your iPhone or your Android phone or now your Windows mobile phone. So something you need to be aware of.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases when it did that, it was just copying it into the disk sort of partition over there, that kind of acts as a Windows disk or whatever, but now it looks like it may actually affect the mobile device as well.
Okay. And one last thing I wanted to mention is it's interesting but not completely surprising that it's using Java as a dropper to me, because we've seen Black Hole Exploit Kit and Phoenix Exploit Kit. And just recently I was looking at one that uses just a small Java dropper to drop a fake system defragmentation tool on your machine. It's like a fake antivirus, but it's not. It's a system defragger. In any event, it looks like Java has been targeted a lot more lately, kind of taking the reins away from Adobe Flash in a certain respect. But I think Oracle's been pretty good about pushing patches out for Java lately. I see pretty frequent patches coming out for it. So, I mean, but interesting.
Yeah, so perhaps some underlying aspects to this. My understanding is Adobe has done some things to protect their software better than they had in the past, and so perhaps the exploits against it are becoming a little harder to come by, and that may have shifted the emphasis toward Java. That's speculation on my part, but certainly that's a possibility, and it's good to see that they're getting patches out quickly. But the hazard is that some systems might not be getting patched quickly enough. Yeah. All right, very good discussion there, and I appreciate that. Thanks, Jim. And so let's shift over to Dave here. Dave, I think one of the things that we really kind of like about SMS is the fact that it's because of the way the system is designed, it makes it more difficult to spoof, or maybe not possible. It seems like there's some situation where it could have the appearance of being spoofed, that it's the source is being spoofed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true, Brian. This is a topic called SMS spoofing, and it's been around for several years, but there was a blog post from last Friday, which was August the 12th, by Pod2G, and this raised the awareness again. Basically, what this is setting a different field, setting a field in the user data header, which is the reply address. So you're not actually going in and changing the sender field. You're actually just saying, well, if you want to reply to this, instead of replying to the sender, reply to this other address. Now, the legitimate use for that is if you're sending from a computer or you're sending from some other device that can't receive text, you can redirect the reply text to some place where you can receive these things. But the illegitimate use is in phishing, basically coming in looking like your bank coming in or something, asking for information from you, and you trusting that, oh, this is my bank, and so I can give them this information. So it seems like different devices handle this in different ways. Adaptive Mobile has done some testing on different devices, and what the Pod 2G individual has raised, and also Adaptive has found, is that the iOS devices, even the most recent pre-release of iOS 6 that hasn't come out yet, it'll display the reply to address rather than the sender, but it'll display it in such a way that it looks like that's the sender. They're kind of masking the sender completely there. Whereas most other devices, most other Androids, Windows Mobiles, BlackBerry, Symbians, ignore this field, and so they just display the real sender and will reply to the real sender. BlackBerry does display both, they said, but I believe what they were saying is that they are still going to be replying to the real sender. And so far, Apple's comments about this is that the sources of SMS really aren't authenticated, and so they recommend using their own product, iMessage, where they do authenticate the sources. However, that's only available on iOS devices, and so that doesn't help you if you want to send to people that are not on those devices. And one other thing is that a tool has popped up that's available on jailbroken iPhones that can create these spoof messages. So in general, it's harder to create a message because the device doesn't usually give you the access to modify that field. But there's now a tool for jailbroken iPhones to create that. So it's easier for some attackers to do that.
Yeah, so, to explain a little bit further what I was referring to, introducing your discussion here, the SMS, I guess perhaps contrary to popular belief, actually uses the legacy signaling system 7 that is typically associated with telephone calls as the delivery mechanism for messages. Now, that won't continue indefinitely. I mentioned it is sort of a legacy solution that will ultimately transition into and change associated with the transition to LTE. But as it is now, there is a fairly robust authentication, I shouldn't call it authentication, but validation mechanism. That is, it's very difficult to spoof the source of activity because it's sort of entrenched in the signaling of the network, although the point is perhaps true that there isn't a cryptographic authentication of the source and that messaging, and certainly the reply to field is really an optional field that's added in by the sender, and hence the situation that's here is that the usage of those fields is perhaps not interpreted entirely consistently between the providers, or that is the device providers. So that'll be an interesting one going forward, and certainly we're looking for ways to help avoid that type of thing from occurring independent or in addition to what the device providers we hope will do to correct that problem.
Right, but just in the meantime, be a little suspicious of sending sensitive information to who you think is sending an SMS to you, or even, if you look at a link, that link may be a malicious link that you're getting that you think is coming from a trusted person. It may not be, so you might want to do some other validations before you follow that link. Absolutely.
It's always healthy, at least from, I guess, as security folks, we tend to be proud of our paranoia and our skepticism. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so speaking of paranoia, John, how about spam activity recently? Any interesting things to point out?
Well, we got a little micro update this week. This is, so just to kind of level set everything, which we normally do, is this is information collected from our spam probe collection process, which is basically a bunch of bogus, fake, well, not fake, they're provisioned email accounts on our various AT&T email services. And if they receive email, we collect it, but nobody should be sending email there because they're not tied to any real accounts or anything. So what we see here are spams that have come in that have been unsolicited, so we take a look at what we see. What we have this week is just kind of a quick update of what we've seen actually within the past 24 to 36 hours. And I'm going to look at what we've seen that's been blocked by AV, by the antivirus built into the email services, and what was undetected and made it through. So those you might actually want to be even more wary about because they're getting through some of the antivirus vendors. So the first one, we saw boatloads and boatloads over the past 24 hours of this Trojan WebKit HTML. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a sample of this because the email spam engines were so good at picking this up. I couldn't find any before they even figured out what it was. So they figured it out right from the very get-go. And the topics on here are scan from HP ScanJet with numbers at the end here. I'm going to change my color real quick. Also scan from Hewlett-Packard ScanJet, topics of that nature, and also wire transfer confirmation is another subject that they were using. We'll take a look at what that looks like in an actual email in a second here. And then from the undetected standpoint, by far, 96% of all the email spams that we saw get through were of this particular one. It has an attachment inside called attachedfilescan.exe. And actually, that's wrapped in a zip file, which we'll go look at. And the subject line is UPS package with a number, a long number after it there. And that's randomized in each email. They do that a lot, where you see these randomized numbers and whatnot at the end of it. So the first one, the HP ScanJet wire transfer spam campaign, I'm calling it. This has a attachment inside. The HP one has hpscan.zip. This is actually an empty zip file because the email scan engine removed it. But just so you have a kind of sense of what it looks like if you're looking for it in your own email systems, this is the basic format of it. Attached document was scanned and sent to you using a Hewlett-Packard HP, blah, blah, blah. Sent by whoever, number of pages. And they're trying to coerce you to open that, thinking that we've seen this before. They send out these, looks like, they have a lot of these printers and scanners, photocopiers, that can actually act as a scanner and email it to you. So they kind of do this as a scheme to kind of trick you into thinking that, oh, I accidentally got someone's document that they meant to send to themselves and somehow I got it. So they, the curious person might open this up to see, well, what was that document the person scanned? Mm-hmm. The wire transfer one just says, dear operator, wire transaction with some AC numbers there, status canceled, and you can find details in the attached file. Unfortunately, all of these were ripped out as well. I wasn't able to find any that actually had an attachment because the email antivirus engines were able to clean all these up before I could actually take a look at one. But just to give you a heads up that we saw lots of these in the past 24 hours, so keep an eye out for that.
So, John, on the previous one, I was looking at the to address for the scan from the HP ScanJet here. Autonomous diffeomorphic. Where the heck do you come up with a word like that?
I don't know. I have no idea. I noticed that as well, but I didn't really get a sense what the context was there. I also didn't check all the other ones to see if there was the same pattern in all of them or not.
So never trust email that's addressed to autonomous diffeomorphic.
Right.
All right. Thank you, John.
The next one, these are ones that were sneaking through the email antivirus engine, and this is a UPS scam. Obviously, it's not from UPS themselves. They're pretending to be UPS. The bad guys are. They're sending spams out. And the basic context of it is they're saying they're purporting to be from UPS and that you tried to send a package. They were unable to send it because the recipient's address was wrong, and you should open up the attached file and fill in the right information, and we can resend it to the proper person. This has a zip file inside as well. That's what's actually attached to the email. I kind of blew it up here so you could see it. I think this number changes, so it's my UPS _ ID and a number that gets randomized.zip. When you open that up, inside is a attached file scan.exe. So if you watch this program a lot, you should be aware of the fact that you shouldn't be clicking on any executables inside zip files from people that you're getting unsolicited email from that you're not expecting. This is probably malware. And as we'll see, it actually is malware. So I threw this into VirusTotal. At this point, it actually is detected pretty well. This is, like I said, within the past 24 hours, so I picked some of the ones that were from early on yesterday where it was not detected. It turns out to be a Zeus Z-bot Trojan, which is not unsuspected. We see a lot of that. In fact, we're seeing a lot of spams as well that have URLs inside where if you click on them, they send you the Black Hole Exploit Kit drive-by web pages, which we've talked about on the programs as well, and also install various Zeus Z-bot Trojans. Some people are picking this up as Cridex as well as some other names. There's a lot of different names, but most of them are picking it up as Z-bot, also known as Zeus, which is that banking crime ware family we talk about a lot. So just wanted to give people a quick heads up on these are the kinds of ones, the two big heavy hitters that we saw a lot of. Like I said, 90% for the first one, maybe 96% of all of them for the second one. So you're probably seeing this in your own email gateways as well over the past 24 hours and should be on the lookout for it.
All right. Okay, very good, John. Appreciate that. And obviously, the whole spam malware thing hasn't let up at all. And I think the situation in terms of internet weather is sort of similar. It's kind of a hurricane season out there. And so, for anybody that's been listening or watching this program for some time now, you're probably well aware that we've been reporting on this security surveillance camera DVR botnet. And it has certainly been pretty active in this last week or so. Just showing on this graph here, we're showing 30 days of the unique source addresses that are scanning, and the activity that I'd shown, or actually analyzed for this week here, I was able to identify well over 100 ports that this particular botnet was scanning on for at least a period of time through the week here. And I'm only showing 20 of those ports on this graphic here. The 20 that were most active is basically what it's showing. And again, this botnet is one. I'm going to show a map of where these bots are located in a minute here. But they generally have been known to be, at least previously, been reporting, China, United States, Korea. We'll see that in a moment. So again, this is looking at the number of sources that are scanning on a given port. Generally, what's happening is it looks like they start scanning activity, and the scanning activity goes for about a day and then sort of dies off. There might be some sort of a timer associated with that scanning as it's sent out. Or it might be that the bots are told to scan a certain number of probes. Certain ones have more processing power than others, and so there seems to be sort of a tail off that is pretty standard for these events, and you can see that in some of these lines here where it tails off. And as we've said before, this appears to be mostly, perhaps there are some other devices involved in this, but it's mostly security surveillance camera DVRs, and we are continuing to investigate the specifics around that. So looking at this scanning activity from a little different perspective, this is in terms of the number of probes that we're seeing. I'm showing this as a cumulative number of probes. That is, for a given period of time, even though there are lots of different ports that are scanning, we're looking at how many probes that are being scanned across the multiples of those ports. And this peaks out at about, say, 32 or so million probes per hour that we see at the peak point. And typical for a given port, they'll probe maybe about 7 million probes or something, a little more than that we detect on our platform. Now, certainly there are probably lots of other probes that we haven't detected, but these are the ones that we picked up on. There's one port of this top 20 that's being graphed here that I wanted to point out. This happens to be the one that was identified as the most anomalous through the course of the week. And this is port 515 TCP, and that happens to be associated with the line printer daemon. That is basically a printer to be able to accept print jobs from a remote source. And there are two reasons, perhaps, that this is of interest. One is that, as I said, it was the one that showed up as most anomalous. But when we look back over the last 30 days, they had previously scanned this port a couple of times near the end of July, at least, and perhaps other times prior to that. Once around, looks like about August 17th, or actually August 15th here, it was probed. And then once again, so it looked like it was started around the end of August 17th, or perhaps a little before that. The significance being here is that they had scanned it before and then came back for more, whereas a lot of these other ports, it doesn't look like there are lots of repeats. So that's perhaps an expression of interest that is of perhaps targeting printers. Now, I remember seeing a presentation at a conference I attended early in the year where somebody had actually gone in and investigated the accessibility of printers from the Internet and was able to actually find lots of printers that were accessible from the Internet. And on top of that, a lot of the printers these days aren't just printers. They have scanning capabilities. They have disk drives installed in them to be able to store documents, or at least cache documents and things of that sort. And by manipulating that, this guy was able to basically demonstrate that he could actually see documents that had been left on the scanner and, get scan images or get images off of the drives and things like that. So this one, in my opinion, kind of raised an eyebrow, so to speak, and seemed to be of special interest to these attackers as well. Now,
and Brian, before you leave this, I just wanted to point out, I think you've pointed this out other times with this graph, that there looks like there are gaps where there's not activity, but it's just based on the ports that you've selected to show here. They were probably scanning on other ports in those times, but this graph would get too busy if you showed those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There were, in this period of time, I picked 20 ports, of which there were really 100 ports, more than 100 ports that I identified that they had been scanning for this botnet. So that's one aspect of this. The other aspect is I've only looked back for this particular report over the last week, and there certainly have been lots of other ports they've been scanning over previous weeks. And so you're absolutely right that if we were to do the cumulative view here over the last 30 days, this graph would be just completely unintelligible. So another perspective that I thought I'd share with you here today is, so it would take an example. I think this is actually based on a particular hour of scanning activity on port 515, and I think it was actually the peak hour that we picked out. And at that point, we identified about 8,700 sources that were scanning on this port. I only mapped out 5,000 of those addresses, that is 5,000 of those source addresses. And this is how they map geographically. So you can see, and incidentally, the yellow spots basically indicate higher levels of concentration than the orange, and then the lowest being red in terms of concentration. They're basically co-located addresses. And so we see some very high concentrations of activity that is sources from China, certainly ones on the east coast of the United States, and then also some on the west coast of the United States, and then also sort of some concentration areas in parts of Europe as well. And last but not least, some concentrations in India. So fairly consistent with the way I'd been reporting previously in terms of where these bots are located. but I have to admit that the distribution is a little wider than I originally anticipated. Basically what this is really showing is concentrations of population. So there doesn't seem to be a real strong demographic associated with this, other than the fact that there are probably devices available at each of these places. Another set of activity that I wanted to report with you here today is outside of the scanning activity. There does seem to have been a rash of denial-of-service attacks, and specifically what I'm showing here is denial-of-service attacks that have been targeting port 53 UDP. That is, port 53 is obviously domain name service, DNS. Showing 30 days of byte activity here. That is where the anomalies were showing most significantly, is in terms of the number of bytes targeting these targets. And there were actually a variety of targets here. Now, last week we did report on a denial-of-service attack that was in fact against AT&T, and that's highlighted here. This was on August 15th. It took place over the course of several hours. But it turns out that there are, in fact, other targets and other attacks that have taken place since then that have shown up on our radar. And I think if I'd scan back farther here, there would probably be some other attacks that would show up. But it seems that there's been sort of a close order rash of activity. So the point here being is, if you have DNS servers that you're operating, make sure that they're well protected. We have seen several different targets of attacks recently, and we are happy to help you with protection in that, but we mostly don't want you to be a victim of those attacks.
And Brian, that scale there, is that 16 gigabits, that top spike?
Yes, actually it is. So what this graph is showing is a difference in terms of what we expect to see in terms of normal DNS activity and what is considered the anomaly, that is how much activity we'd seen at that particular time, subtracting out the sort of the baseline set of activities. So, for example, in the attacks that we saw against the AT&T DNS servers last week, we saw on this particular platform, which doesn't have visibility into all the activity, but we saw it peaking up at least above 4 gigabits per second. This peak attack up here was exceeding certainly 16 gigabits of activity. It turns out the actual attack activity in these is probably a few times higher than that, but it depends on the circumstances of the attack to determine whether or not this particular analysis platform sees it that way or not. It's a good point. The attacks are certainly getting quite large, and I don't know of any enterprise business that's currently subscribing to on the order of 20 gigabits of bandwidth in front of their DNS servers. Yeah. So it is good to be prepared for situations like this. Taking a look at some of our standard reports here, there's the pie chart of the most probed ports. This is the top 10 ports that are getting the most probes over the last week. Actually, this was on a particular day, not over the last week. We see certainly at the top of the list, port 445. That's pretty standard. Next showing here, port 1433. That's associated with MySQL database. And we're also seeing port 22, port 443, which is relatively unusual here. That's SSL. Port 23 is Telnet, and then port 3389, which is a pretty standard one, being the remote desktop protocol. And as I've been pointing out, because of this other botnet that's scanning on lots of other ports, the other category is expanded somewhat, and it's actually in the next graph here even exaggerated even further. So nearly 50% of our measurement, that is the pie chart in terms of the most sources probing, is gotten into the other category, and that's because of, as I mentioned earlier, the hundreds of different ports that security surveillance camera DVR botnet is scanning. But a few notable items here. One is that there are two ports that are a little bit irregular or unusual to see on here. One is this port 3005 TCP. The other one is 1754 TCP, which we've seen before. This one happens to be, the 1754 happens to be Oracle Enterprise Manager. This other one is Genius License Manager. I don't know too much about that application. Obviously, it seems to suggest managing of licenses for software. So I don't know if there's a relationship between these two, but they are, somewhat unusual to see on our top list for the most sources that are probing for them. So clearly there's a botnet interested in that. There was another one, 32761 UDP. I wasn't able to associate with that with a specific application or anything, so I just make a note of that. And then other ports that show up in here, certainly the top hitter, port 445, port 80, and port 23 TCP. So that covers it for today. That's our show for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at threattrak@list.att.com. This video is available through att.com/threattrack, or you can look for it on YouTube. The audio version is available on iTunes or FeedBurner. Just search for the term ThreatTraq. And I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Jim, John, and Dave for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad. We'll be back next week with another AT&T Threat Track, and until then, keep your network safe.